The wind moved across the wide Kansas plains like a thing alive, bending the tall winter grass until it whispered secrets only the lonely could hear. The old farmhouse stood against the horizon, weather-beaten boards, holding on through more storms than any man could count. Inside, a single lantern burned. One man, one child, one silence that had lasted far too long. Elias Turner sat at the small wooden table, turning his wedding band with his thumb the way he always did when the nights felt particularly heavy. Across from him, the second chair stayed empty. Her chair. 3 years of empty nights and colder mornings, and he still couldn't bear to move it. His daughter Lily slept in the small loft above, her breathing soft, like the memory of a lullaby. Elias stared at the window, watching frost crawl across the glass as if winter were trying to reclaim everything left inside him. Christmas Eve. But it felt no different than yesterday or the year before. Just another night where grief settled like snow, quiet, suffocating, impossible to shake. The lantern flickered when the wind pressed against the thin walls. Elias closed his eyes. He could still see Anna's smile, bright and warm as spring wheat, hear her humming while kneading dough, feel the brush of her fingertips when she'd pass behind him in the kitchen. But memories didn't keep a man warm. They only reminded him of what he'd lost. "Papa?" Lily's small voice drifted down, thick with sleep. He looked up. "What is it, sweetheart?" She knelt at the railing, her braids messy, cheeks still flushed from dreaming. "Do you think Mama can see us tonight?" The words struck him with the same ache they always did. Sharp, tender, unanswerable. "I think," he swallowed, "I think she watches over us every day, Lily. But will she come back, ever?" His breath caught. She asked less often now, but every time felt like peeling open a wound he'd spent years trying to stitch closed. "Come back to bed," he whispered. "It's late." "But, Lily." His voice softened. "Sleep now." She lingered a moment, then slipped back under her quilt. Elias pressed both hands to the table, grounding himself. He needed to keep moving. Keep doing. Keep surviving. Because the moment he stopped, the grief filled the whole room. Outside, the cold deepened. Inside, the lantern dimmed, and the house felt too big for one man's silence. He rose with the first gray light of morning. Winter mornings didn't wait for grief. They came hard and fast and bone-cold. He tucked Lily into her coat, helped her pull on worn boots, and together they stepped into the brittle dawn. The barn sat a short walk from the house, its roof sagging, its door stubborn from years of Kansas storms. Elias pushed it open and let Lily run ahead to her pony. "Morning, Maple," she whispered, touching the pony's nose with a gentleness that reminded him painfully of Anna. He busied himself with feed buckets, trying to outrun the memories already catching up. That's when he heard it. A distant stumble of hooves, uneven, desperate, cutting through the cold like an alarm. Elias straightened. Another stumble. Closer. A horse. Injured. And someone with it. He stepped outside, hand instinctively moving to the old rifle by the barn door. Out here, unexpected visitors rarely brought peace. Through the pale morning haze, a rider appeared. A woman slumped forward, clinging to the reins as her chestnut horse limped toward the farm. Snow clung to her hair, her coat, her lashes. Her head lifted just enough to see the barn. Then she collapsed. Elias didn't think. He ran. His boots pounded the frost-hardened ground as he reached her just as she slid off the saddle, hitting the earth with a soft cry. "Ma'am?" He knelt beside her. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open. Striking eyes, weathered from travel but clear with determination. Her breath hitched. "I'm sorry, my horse stepped in a burrow. I couldn't keep him moving. I tried to reach a homestead." "You reached one." Elias lifted her gently, shocked by the cold in her skin. "How long have you been riding in the storm?" "Since last night," she murmured. "I didn't know where else to go." Lily stood in the barn doorway, frightened but curious. "Papa, who is she?" "I don't know yet," he said, lifting the woman into his arms. "But she needs warmth. Now." He carried her into the house, the lantern still burning low inside. He laid her on the couch near the stove, removed her soaked gloves, and wrapped a quilt around her shoulders. Lily hovered nearby, wide-eyed. "What's your name, ma'am?" he asked. She breathed slowly, trying to steady herself. Clara Whitlock. I'm Elias Turner, he said. This is my daughter. Lily offered a timid wave. Clara tried to sit up, but the effort made her wince. I didn't mean to intrude. You didn't intrude, Elias said quickly, surprising even himself with the certainty in his voice. Storm would have killed you if you kept riding. You're safe here. Clara glanced around the small house, taking in the plain walls, the empty chair across from the table, the lack of decorations despite it being Christmas. Her gaze softened, understanding more than he'd spoken aloud. I'm grateful, she whispered. Elias rose. I'll check on your horse. Lily, stay with her. He stepped out again, letting the cold bite into him, the kind of cold that made a man feel alive just through the pain. The horse was exhausted but not badly injured. A pulled tendon, maybe. A week's rest would do. Elias led it into a stall, gave it water, fed it gently. Something warm stirred unexpectedly in him. Purpose beyond routine. Responsibility beyond survival. When he returned to the house, the lantern glowed brighter, fire warming the room. Clara sat upright now, her blonde hair, darkened from melted snow, falling loose around her shoulders. She looked stronger already, more present. Your daughter kept me company, she said with a grateful smile that reached her eyes. Lily beamed proudly. I told her about Maple and Mama's quilt, and how Papa makes the best biscuits. Clara's gaze flicked toward Elias. It seems she thinks very highly of you. He pretended not to hear, busying himself with filling the kettle. Compliments unsettled him more than storms. You must be hungry, he said. You're welcome to supper. I don't want to be a burden. You won't be. The words came too quickly, too honest. Clara's eyes lingered on him a moment longer, long enough to make him turn away, as if her gaze saw straight through him to the hollow spaces he'd spent years hiding. Over the next hours, the farmhouse slowly changed, not in big ways, but in the quiet, careful ones only a woman's presence could create. Clara folded the edges of the quilt neatly, swept stray straw from the floor, placed the kettle just so on the stove, not replacing Anna, just adding warmth where cold had settled. It unsettled Elias more than he expected. Lily asked endless questions. Clara answered each with patience. Where are you traveling? How long were you riding alone? Do you miss your family? Elias tensed at that last question, but Clara's expression didn't falter. Yes, she said softly. Every day. Her voice carried a weight he recognized, the weight of someone who'd loved deeply and lost deeply. Later, as Elias chopped wood outside to clear his thoughts, Clara stepped to the doorway, hands folded against the chill. Your daughter is wonderful, she said. She has a strong heart. She takes after her mother. Clara nodded gently. I figured as much. He paused mid-swing. How? You speak of her memory with care, and your home feels like someone loved it once, someone who still lingers here. Elias swallowed hard, looked away. Lily doesn't remember much. That must be hard, Clara said. For both of you. He didn't answer. Silence was safer. That night they shared supper. Simple stew, fresh biscuits, a warmth spreading through the room that Elias hadn't felt in years. Lily laughed at one of Clara's stories about her brother, trying to tame a wild turkey. Clara laughed too, a sound soft but sure, warm enough to thaw the coldest corners of the farmhouse. Elias felt something twist inside him. Not discomfort, not quite hope, something in between. When Lily went to bed, Clara lingered by the fire watching the flames. My husband died last winter, she said suddenly. Elias looked up sharply. A fever swept through our town, she continued. Took him in 2 days. I lost more than a partner. I lost the life we were building. Elias's breath froze. Grief recognized grief. I thought traveling west might help, Clara said. Thought I could outrun the emptiness. But it follows, doesn't it? He nodded slowly. It does. The fire crackled. The wind pressed against the walls. Clara looked at him. Really looked, her gaze steady, searching. You've been alone for a long time. He didn't deny it. And lonely, she added softly. Even longer. He closed his eyes. The truth of it was too raw to hide. Clara stood. I'll sleep in the small room. Thank you for your kindness, Elias. When she disappeared down the hallway, The farmhouse fell into a silence that wasn't empty. A silence that had room for more. Elias sat alone, staring at the empty chair across from him. Anna's chair. The one he'd never moved. He whispered, barely audible. "I'm trying." Whether to Anna or himself, he wasn't sure. The lantern flickered, shadows shifting across the walls. Outside, winter settled over the land. Inside, for the first time in 3 long years, the house didn't feel so cold. The next morning came with a pale blue sky, crisp and sharp as broken glass. Elias stepped out onto the porch, pulling his coat tighter against the wind. He'd forgotten what it felt like to hear another person moving. Inside the house, footsteps soft, purposeful, unfamiliar. For 3 years, the only sounds had been his own, Lily's, and the restless sighs of a home that had grown too quiet. Now Clara's presence shifted the air itself. Inside he could hear faint movement, the soft creak of the floorboards as she tended to the stove. Lily's voice drifted down the hall, bright, awake, alive in a way he hadn't heard in far too long. He let out a slow breath, one he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The barn door groaned as he pushed it open. Clara's horse, a chestnut mare with kind eyes, lifted its head when he approached. Elias checked the animal's leg, moving with the care of a man who'd tended creatures his whole life. The tendon was still swollen but mending. "A few more days," he murmured to the mare. "Maybe a week. Not time to travel yet." He straightened as footsteps approached from behind. "Is she improving?" Clara asked, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. He nodded. "Slowly. You won't be riding anywhere soon." Her expression flickered, relief mixed with worry. "I know I'm intruding longer than intended." "You're not intruding," he said softly, surprising himself again with the truth in his own voice. Clara looked at him for a moment, studying him with those steady eyes that saw far too much. Then she offered a faint smile and turned back toward the house. Elias followed slowly, uncertain why the air felt lighter and heavier all at once. Inside, Lily stood on a stool, stirring something in a bowl much too big for her small arms. Flour dusted her cheeks like snowflakes. "We're making biscuits," she declared proudly. "Miss Clara said she'd teach me." Elias paused in the doorway. Something tightened in his chest. Familiar yet distant. Anna used to make biscuits with Lily like this. Lily had been only 3, barely tall enough to reach the counter, but Anna insisted she help anyway. "Little hands learn best," she'd say, laughing as flour covered everything in sight. Now Clara stood where Anna once had, her sleeves rolled to her elbows, helping Lily lift the bowl properly. But Clara wasn't replacing Anna. The moment made Elias ache, but not in the painful way he expected. It felt gentle. Clara looked back over her shoulder. "We hope you're hungry." He cleared his throat. "Always." The morning passed in quiet rhythms. Lily's delighted chatter, Clara's soft laughter, the warm scent of biscuits filling the house. Elias repaired a broken hinge on the door, listening to the life moving behind him. He couldn't remember the last time the house sounded like this, like a home instead of a memory. By midday, the wind picked up again, rattling the loose boards on the porch. Clara stepped outside, watching the sky shift. "There's a storm coming," she said. "Another one," Elias muttered. "Winter hasn't been kind this year. Do you usually spend Christmas this quietly?" He hesitated. "I try not to make much of it." Clara nodded slowly. "Holidays can be cruel for the grieving." He didn't answer. Some truths didn't need words. Inside, Lily sat near the fire, humming as she played with the wooden horse figurine her mother had carved for her long ago. Clara watched her a moment, then spoke softly. "She's bright," she said. "And brave." Elias nodded. "She had to be." Clara turned to him then, voice gentle. "She carries both of you inside her. I can see that." Her words wrapped around him like a warmth he hadn't expected. He looked away quickly, focusing on the fire. As afternoon settled in, Elias set to chopping wood. Clara joined him outside, gathering the smaller pieces he split. Snow began falling, thin flakes drifting from the gray sky. "You don't have to help," he said. She smiled faintly. "Doing nothing feels heavier than lifting wood." He understood that. He'd lived in silence long enough to know stillness could be suffocating. For a moment they worked in companionable silence. Then Clara spoke, her voice low. "I thought grief made us smaller," she said. made the world shrink around us. But since I left home, since I started traveling, I realized it's not the world that gets smaller. Elias glanced at her. What is it then? Our courage, she said. Our willingness to step toward life again. The words settled between them like falling snow, soft but impossible to ignore. Inside, Lily appeared at the window, pressing her hands to the glass. Papa, Miss Clara? Come see what I made. They stepped in, shaking snow from their coats. I made us a picture, Lily announced proudly. On a scrap of paper, she'd drawn 3 figures, a tall man, a shorter woman, and a little girl in the middle holding both their hands. Above them, she'd drawn a sun peeking through clouds. Elias froze. Clara's breath caught. Lily smiled up at them. It's us. Elias opened his mouth, but no words came. Clara gently touched Lily's head. It's beautiful, she whispered. As evening deepened, Clara prepared a simple supper. Elias sat at the table watching Lily help her knead dough. The fire cast a warm glow across Clara's face, softening her features, making them gentler than the first day he'd seen her half frozen in the snow. He found himself smiling, small, reluctant, but real. Clara noticed. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. After supper, Lily climbed onto Elias's lap, rubbing her eyes. Papa, will Miss Clara stay until Christmas? Elias hesitated. We'll see, sweetheart. I hope she stays, Lily whispered, curling into him. Elias's heart tightened. When Lily went to bed, Clara stood by the window, arms wrapped around herself. You have a good home, she said softly. Even with its quiet, even with its ghosts. Elias stood beside her. It didn't feel like one for a long time. And now? He looked at her, at the way her presence warmed the cold corners of the room, at the way Lily smiled again, at the way he exhaled more easily. It feels less empty, he said quietly. Since you came. Clara's breath caught. Elias. But before she could finish, a sharp knock broke the moment. Elias stiffened. No one visited this late. He opened the door and found Tom and Margaret Caldwell, neighbors from down the road, bundled in heavy coats, snow crusted in their hair. Evening, Elias, Tom said, voice tight. Margaret glanced past him into the house. Her eyes landed on Clara, standing by the fireplace, shawl draped elegantly around her shoulders. Oh, Margaret said, her voice dropping. Didn't know you had company? Elias's jaw tightened. He stepped slightly forward, blocking the doorway. Clara's horse was injured. She's staying until it heals. Margaret's voice sharpened in polite judgment. I see. Tom exchanged a look with his wife, unspoken but loud enough to fill the space between them. It's just that folks talk, Elias, Margaret said, especially with a young woman staying in a widower's home. People can talk all they want, Elias said, voice steady but rising. I don't answer to them. Tom cleared his throat. It's about Lily, son. Appearances matter. Clara stepped forward. Mr. Caldwell, I mean no trouble. You haven't, Margaret said tightly. But you know how it looks. Clara's face fell just slightly. Elias felt something hot rise in his chest. The Caldwells offered stiff goodbyes and walked back into the storm, leaving a trail of judgment behind them. Elias shut the door hard. Clara turned away. They're right, she whispered. They're not, he snapped. She looked at him, eyes soft with hurt, not anger. I don't belong here, Elias. I'm a stranger. And the world isn't kind to women who travel alone, much less ones who stay where they shouldn't. You're not staying where you shouldn't. But she shook her head. I don't want to bring you trouble. You didn't. She didn't argue. She didn't have to. The bruise of the Caldwells' visit lingered in the air. That night, Lily slept clutching her wooden horse. Clara retreated early to her small room. Elias stood by the dying fire long after the house went quiet. He stared at Anna's chair, the wood worn smooth by years of her touch. He whispered, barely audible. I don't know what to do. The wind howled outside. Inside, the fire finally died. The morning after the Caldwells' visit dawned pale and brittle, as if the sky itself were holding its breath. Elias woke with the taste of ash in his mouth, sleep uneasy and short. For the first time since Clara had arrived, the farmhouse felt fragile. Not because the walls were weak, but because something delicate and new had begun to live inside them, and neighbors' whispers brushed at it like scavenging wind. He found Clara at the kitchen table, fingers wrapped around a cup she didn't seem to taste. Her eyes were rimmed with red where she'd tried not to cry. When she saw him at the doorway, she gave a small, tired smile, the kind of smile a woman used to carrying her own storms. "You should rest," Elias said before he could stop himself. The words were automatic, his instinct to protect, to offer what small comforts he could. "I'm fine," she replied, but the way her shoulders tightened told him otherwise. Lily barreled into the room like a bright comet, sweeping away the chill with a babble of songs and plans for the day. Her cheer was a bandage on raw skin, but a needed one. "Papa, Miss Clara, will you teach me to sew today? I want to make you a pocket for your tools." She brandished a piece of cloth with proud determination. Clara's face softened the way sunrise softens a frost. "I'd be honored." Elias watched them as if seeing them through gauze. The image struck him. Clara and Lily bent over a scrap of cloth like two halves of a whole. He wanted to say something brave, to stand and declare how foolish it was for neighbors to judge. Instead he said, "Keep an ear out for the sleigh bells. The postman usually comes by noon." He went outside with the pretense of chores but with a secret urgency. The road into town was a curved scar through the plains, and he walked it the way a man walks to meet a verdict. Gossip and judgment were two different things, and both could kill what was growing here if he let them. At the post office he found more than mail. Faces turned as he entered, small nods, stiff smiles that didn't reach eyes. "Mr. Harper?" The storekeeper cleared his throat. "Heard about the woman at your place. Elias?" His voice was cautious, shaped by years of watching small towns swallow themselves whole over such matters. "It's Clara," Elias replied. "Her horse hurt its leg. She's staying until it heals." "We all take turns helping," Harper said. "Still, people talk. You know how it is." Elias set his jaw. He did know. He also knew how easy it was for a man's courage to fray under the slow erosion of other folks' opinions. He took the few letters he'd come for and left, shoulders heavier than when he'd arrived. Back at the farmhouse, Clara was sitting at the table again. But now she had a needle and thread in her hand. She moved with a quiet, practiced motion, threading the needle like it was a ritual. Lily was glued to her side, watching each stitch as if it were magic. "You should come to town for the fair next week," Clara said suddenly, brightening. "They'll have a quilting contest and a pie stand. Your Lily could win something for sure." Elias almost laughed. The idea of Lily at a fair made his chest ache in a good way. But the thought of facing the town with Clara by his side made his throat close. Not everyone would be kind. "Maybe," he said, and watched Clara's shoulders dip a fraction. She read him in a way only someone who'd known the ache of starting over could. The days blurred into domestic routines that felt maddeningly fragile. Feeding horses, mending fences, teaching Lily to sew simple stitches, Clara discovering the joy of a cupboard arranged just so. She would hum absent-mindedly while she worked, a low tune that seemed to knit the house together. Elias found himself answering to her humming, unconsciously fitting his movements to hers. And yet at night, when the lamp burned low and the house returned to its old shadows, the whisper of neighbors pressed through the walls. He could feel it like a draft. One evening, a storm rolled up quicker than the forecasts predicted. Snow began to fall sideways, whipped by a wind that bit and stung. The farmhouse shuttered itself against it, and in the small hours when even the animals slept, a hard knock came at the door. Elias opened it to find Sheriff Mullins on the porch, hat in hand, snow crusted like a crown. The sheriff's face was unreadable, as if he'd learned to keep opinions close and let the law do the talking. "Evening, Elias," Mullins said. "You got a moment?" Elias set his jaw. "Always." They stepped inside. The sheriff's eyes flicked to Clara, then to Lily, and finally back to Elias. "We've had complaints," he said quietly. "Folks saying a woman staying with a widower is unseemly. They asked me to come by, see for myself." Elias felt the floor tilt. "Complaints?" Mullins sighed. "You know how small towns work. Folks worry about appearances. They don't like what causes them to think." Elias's hands went cold. "Is this a crime?" Mullins hesitated, then said, "No, not exactly. But some want to make sure everything is proper. So I came by to see how things are." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. I'll be frank, Elias. Some people feel you're moving too fast. They think it might not be right for Lily's reputation. It's a nasty thing to say, but it's what they told me. The words landed like a stone. Elias's fist clenched until his knuckles whitened. Is that how they see it? He whispered. As if Lily is a pawn? Mullins looked away. I don't make the rules. I just try to keep the peace. Elias escorted the sheriff out, the porch a place that suddenly felt like an arena. When he shut the door, the house lulled into a silence that hummed with unspoken things. Clara stood by the hearth, her hands folded where the light could catch them. They asked you to come? She said without accusation. Only resignation. They asked me to ask you to leave, he said. The words were heavier than expected. Clara's jaw tightened. For a moment he saw a flash of the woman who'd traveled through winter, the woman who'd left a life and chosen motion over stillness. So, she said softly, they think I'll ruin your daughter? They think? His own voice broke on the thought. He could feel Lily somewhere upstairs, probably asleep, trusting and unaware, and the idea of her branded by gossip made something cold edge his heart. Clara's eyes were steady, not angry, not pleading. I can leave, she said. If it protects Lily. You won't, he said. He was surprised by the sharpness of it. It came like a bell, clear and final. You won't leave because of them. She met his gaze. For a moment they stood like two people at a precipice, measuring the weight of what to hold on to and what to let go. Clara's lips trembled. I don't want to cause you trouble. You doing the right thing isn't trouble, Elias said. The trouble is their fear. They argued quietly then, not with loud accusations, but with the kind of honest, scraping truths that had no pretense. Clara had always been careful, intentionally so, because she'd learned the hard way that solitude is often read as scandal. Elias told her about Anna's folks, about the easy cruelty of neighbors who measure a life by appearances. You think I'd choose to stay where people whisper? She asked. Do you think I don't know their names spoken like accusations? He had no answer for that. He could only look at her and see the line of years etched into their faces, their losses, their stubbornness, their lonely courage. Stay, he said again. Stay if you want. She closed her eyes. If I stay, Elias, I won't do it for their sakes. I'll stay because I want to. Because I like being here. Because Lily's laugh makes the house breathe and because… Her voice hitched. Because you make me feel less hollow than I have. He reached for her hand, felt the thin tremor there. The touch was small, an exchange of fragile warmth in a world that wanted to be cruel. Then the next morning, the worst domino fell. A rumor started at the general store, the kind that doesn't need a voice to grow. Someone had seen Clara late at night at the well with another man. It didn't matter that the man was her brother stopping through town on business, or that the meeting was to borrow a wagon. Rumor needs no facts. It only needs the powder of suspicion to ignite. By midday, the farmhouse had a shadow at its step. Margaret Caldwell appeared again, her chin held high with sanctimony. People aren't happy, Elias, she said sharply. They say you're making choices for your child that aren't, well, proper. He felt the blood leave his face. What do you mean? You know what people are saying, she snapped. That a woman lodging here brings talk. That Lily will be talked about. You're talking about my daughter, he said. The words came hard, clean. You're the one making a judgment about her. Margaret's lips thinned. I'm trying to help her. By what? Ruining her life with lies? The exchange rose then. Neighbors gathered like vultures at a carcass. People came by not out of curiosity alone, but with certainty. Certainty that their moral measure was the only true one. They stood in the snow, murmuring, faces folded into winter collars but hot with judgment. Clara came to the doorway, shoulders squared in a way that surprised Elias. If this is about me, she said, voice steady as the plane, I will leave. I don't want to be the cause of harm to your child. Lily, who had been playing by the hearth, ran to them without being asked, her small face streaked with tears. Don't leave, Miss Clara, she said, voice shaking. They're wrong. A hush fell. A hush the size of a storm. Elias felt something in him snap and recombine into something new. He saw Lily, so small and fearless, bearing witness in a way the adults refused to. He saw Clara, steadfast, unbowed, willing to sacrifice herself for the child. She'd only known a little while. "No," he said simply. The single syllable held more than a refusal. It held a choice. "You won't go because they say so," he added. "You'll stay because you belong here." A murmur rose, shock, confusion, some measure of grudging respect from those who understood what it took to stand by a choice. Margaret Caldwell harumphed, turned, and walked back down the road with her head held as high as before, but a different sort of respect in the angle of her shoulders. The others followed, some grudging, some sheepish. The wind took their whispers and tossed them like so much dry grass. Inside, the farmhouse felt like a body finally taking a breath. Clara sank into a chair, face wet with an exhaustion that came from holding oneself up against a world that said you must fall. Elias sat opposite her. He took Anna's old letter from the drawer, the one he'd been too afraid to read since the day she left it. For 3 years he'd kept it sealed, a relic of an impossible promise. He took it out then, hands trembling, and read aloud with a voice that shook. "My love," the letter began in Anna's tidy script, "if I do not come home, promise me you will keep the light burning for our girl. Promise me you will not bury yourself in sorrow so deep that life cannot reach you. Promise me you will let happiness in when it comes, and that you will give our child a chance to know what love looks like beyond grief." The words fell like a balm. Elias's throat burned. He looked at Clara and found his voice steadier. "Anna asked me to live," he said, "not to die in pieces beside her memory." Clara reached across the table and took his hand, a simple anchoring that sent warmth through his numb limbs. "Then we live," she said. They lived then with intention, not because the town had forgiven, or because burdens had vanished, but because they chose it, because they decided a child's laughter and a woman's company were worth more than the hollow comforts of public opinion. Winter still had its teeth, and the land kept its silence where it wanted to. But inside the farmhouse, heat built not only in the stove, but in the choices made across a small table. There would be more fights, more whispered judgments, maybe even consequences that cost in ways small towns measure. But for that moment, the house held 3 people who had decided to keep one another. Lily slept that night with Clara's shawl tucked around her shoulders, and Elias sat by the late burning fire. Anna's letter folded on his knee. He read passages until the ink blurred, until the room felt fuller than it had in years. Outside, the wind sang its lonely song. Inside, something stubborn and stubbornly hopeful took root. They were not healed. Not yet. But they had begun. And sometimes, Elias thought as he closed the letter and laid it back where it belonged, beginning was all that mattered. The last stretch of winter curled tight around the plains, a season refusing to loosen its grip. Yet inside the Turner farmhouse, something had changed. The air felt warmer, lighter, shaped by routines that no longer belonged to loneliness alone. Clara's humming drifted from room to room. Lily's laughter threaded through the walls, and Elias felt the weight that had lived in his chest for 3 years begin, slowly, carefully to lift. For the first time since Anna's death, he didn't dread waking up. He found himself listening for Clara's footsteps in the morning, for her soft greeting at the stove, for the way she'd gently correct Lily's stitching or praise her drawings. Even the house itself responded, creaking less, welcoming more, as if the old boards recognized the presence of a woman who walked with purpose. Still, something unspoken hovered between them, a space that grew smaller each day but had not yet disappeared. One evening they sat by the fire while Lily slept upstairs. Snow tapped at the window, steady and quiet. Clara had a quilt across her lap, mending a tear with neat, patient stitches. Elias pretended to read a newspaper, but his eyes drifted to her more often than to the page. "You're finally making use of that chair," she said, smiling faintly without looking up. He glanced at the old rocking chair, the one that had belonged to Anna. It felt wrong to let it sit empty forever. "It doesn't feel wrong now," Clara said softly. He shook his head. "No, it doesn't." Her needle paused. She looked at him then, really looked, and something inside him tightened. Not with fear, but with longing he'd buried deep. "Elias," she said quietly, "you're allowed to want more from life than survival." He closed the paper, And what if wanting hurts someone? What if I choose wrong again? Then you try again, Clara replied. Life isn't a straight line. It's a road with ruts and storms and places you stop to breathe. But you keep walking. He swallowed hard, unsure which scared him more, the risk of moving forward or the thought of staying frozen. Clara folded the quilt. You're a good man, a careful man. But sometimes being careful means losing the very thing that could save you. He didn't answer, not because he disagreed, because the truth felt too heavy to speak. Days passed. The storm eased. The sun returned in timid stretches, glinting off snow like broken glass turning gold. Clara's mare healed enough for short walks, and soon she'd be able to travel again. The thought knotted something in Elias's gut. Lily felt it too. She clung to Clara's hand more, followed her around the house, asked questions she'd never asked before. Will you stay forever? Will you be here for spring planting? Will you help me with Mama's garden? Clara answered gently each time. I don't know yet, sweetheart. But each answer chipped at Elias's calm. Then one morning, Clara stepped outside before breakfast. Elias watched her from the doorway as she stood by the fence line, staring at the horizon with a tension he recognized. The tension of someone deciding whether to leave or stay, whether to risk a new life or return to the safety of solitude. He joined her quietly. Thinking? He asked. Yes. About leaving? Yes, she said honestly. And about staying? Wind pushed a strand of hair across her cheek. She didn't brush it away. I never meant to root myself here, Clara said. I only meant to rest, to find a warm place in the cold. But now that I have, I don't know how to leave it behind. His heart hammered, absurdly loud. Then don't. She shut her eyes. It's not that simple. People will talk. They already do. Let them talk, Elias murmured. They don't live our life. But they influence it, she said. They judge Lily. They will judge her more if I stay. He flinched, because she was right. And I don't want you resenting me someday, she added, for making things harder. I could never resent you. You don't know that. He turned toward her, voice rough. I know that this house hasn't felt alive in 3 years. I know that Lily smiles again because of you. I know that when you walk into a room, even the shadows shift. She looked up, startled by the rawness in his tone. I don't know the future, Elias said, but I know this. If you leave, this house will go back to being a shell. And he exhaled shakily. I'm tired of living like a ghost. Her breath caught. She opened her mouth, but before she could speak, hooves thundered across the snow. A rider approached, fast. Elias stiffened. Clara's hand clutched the fence. The horse slowed as it neared, and a man swung down, a younger man, rugged frost clinging to his coat. His eyes searched the yard until they landed on Clara. Clara? Her face drained of color. Daniel? Daniel strode forward. I've been tracking you for weeks. You left without a word. Elias felt the world tilt. Daniel turned to him. I'm her brother. Relief washed over Elias, but only for a moment. Daniel's gaze snapped back to Clara. You vanished. I thought you'd gone somewhere dangerous, and now I find you living in a widower's house. Clara, what were you thinking? Clara flinched. Elias stepped forward, ready to intervene, but Clara raised a hand. It's all right, she whispered. He's just worried. No, Daniel said sharply. I'm angry. You ran from your grief. You didn't let us help you. You didn't even say goodbye. His voice softened then, cracking. I lost him too, but you shut me out. Clara's eyes filled. Elias looked away, giving them space, though every part of him ached to step between them. After a long silence, Clara spoke. I didn't know how to breathe without him, so I kept moving. Moving felt easier than feeling. Daniel's anger melted. He stepped forward and embraced her, holding his sister like someone who'd feared she was lost forever. I just want you to come home, Daniel murmured. Clara's breath hitched. I don't know where home is anymore. Her gaze drifted to Elias. His heart pounded. Daniel followed her gaze. His eyes narrowed slightly in understanding. And then quietly he asked the question that mattered most. Do you want to come back? Or do you want to stay here? The question hung in the cold air like a held breath. Clara looked at the farmhouse. The lantern glowing through the window. Lily's small figure pressing her face to the glass, waiting. Then she looked at Elias. He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't dare hope. Clara exhaled, voice trembling. I want to stay. I think I've finally stopped running. Daniel nodded slowly. Then I won't stand in your way. He turned to Elias. Take care of her. She's been carrying more than she lets on. I know, Elias said softly. And I will. Daniel clasped his hand. I can see that. He mounted his horse again, tipped his hat, and rode off into the fading storm. Clara watched him disappear. Elias stepped closer. You meant that? He asked quietly. About staying? She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. Yes. He reached for her hand, hesitated, and she closed the space, fingers threading with his. You don't have to decide everything today, he whispered. Only whether you want to keep walking alongside us. I do, she said. More than anything. Inside, Lily flung open the door and ran across the yard, throwing herself into Clara's arms. You're not leaving? She cried. No, Clara whispered, holding her tightly. Not if your papa wants me here. Lily spun to Elias, hope shining like firelight. Papa? Elias looked at Clara. At Lily. At the home that had come back to life. Yes, he said, voice breaking. I want her here. Lily shrieked with happiness, hugging them both at once, her small arms not quite reaching but trying anyway. That night, the three of them sat by the fire. The house felt full, not crowded, but complete. Clara's shawl hung on the back of a chair. Lily's sewing rested on the table. Elias's hand rested over Clara's in the quiet, warm glow of the lantern. He whispered a silent thank you to Anna, not for leaving, but for the love that had shaped him enough to love again. And as the fire crackled low, spring began its slow return, not outside, but in the hearts beating under that small farmhouse roof. Three where there had once been one. A family, not rebuilt, but reborn.